Hello, it's me. I'm in Canada dreaming about the Tudor I used to be when I was younger and free to read. Yes, so it's been a while. Like, it's not that long, but I swear it feels long. If I'm not doing 2 videos a week, it feels like I'm failing. It's been a busy last few weeks and months, I guess, let's be honest. So this month of my wrap up, I'm looking at 4 books, but I'm going to talk about 6 because I wanted to finish those 2 last month, so I'm just going to count it anyways. But yeah, I've been so behind. I want to make videos, but I have no time to read or to do this. But I do now, and I'm so happy to be back. So thank you for joining me for my August wrap up. So, as I said, I read 4 to 6 books this month. I read books this month, and I'm about to talk about them, so let's just get into it. The first one I'll talk about. Honestly, these books feel like I read them so long ago. These last few weeks have just been like time slows to a crawl. I read Charles Dickens. Which one did I read? Good question. Which one did I read? I should remember the name of the book that I read. Great Expectations. It was Great Expectations. And did it meet my great expectations? Not really. I think I gave it 3 to 3.5 stars. Great Expectations is the story of a young boy who comes up out of poverty and sort of gets to meet these great expectations of him. And I don't know, this book, it has some good things going for it. First off, the narrator was Frank Muller, one of the first favorites I ever had in audiobooks. And that wasn't enough to save it though, because I didn't love the writing style. It took me a while to connect to our characters. Part of it is that the characters are caricatures. Like, they're extreme representations of certain types of people in real life. And like, it's honestly exactly like A Christmas Carol, which I consider a top 10 favorite of mine. But the difference is, I guess, in A Christmas Carol, the eccentricity of it, the caricature nature of it, just feels so suited to a Christmas type story. It's like you're watching a Hallmark movie. Things are supposed to be eccentric and up the top. But here, it just, in a book that's meant to be more serious, I thought, it just didn't work very well. Like, when I first started reading it, I was like, this guy and his sister, like his family, everyone he talks to are just terrible people. I don't understand what the redeeming qualities are here. And I will say they're not all like this, and I know people love this story for its wonderful characters. I know they're considered very memorable, and in general, like, yes, some did work for me, and there were parts of the story I actually really liked. Like, I liked the love story side of it, or I don't want to spoil it, so I'll just leave it at that. And I guess I get it more as we go on. And I also like the direction it went, because like the raw story, this idea that this kid is getting bestowed upon him this right to not exactly royalty, but basically royalty, all because some rich person deemed him worthy. And like, that idea, I did not like that idea, but I will say that it goes in a certain direction with it that I liked, and I appreciate it. But the idea of just like, rich people being nice, that's not something that appeals to me. And I will say it's a bit more than that, so I appreciate it for that. So, not my cup of tea. I'm not giving up yet. I want to read at least another one in here. Otherwise, I'll have to get rid of this collection. It's so big. I need to read more of it. Next up is a book I enjoyed a lot more, actually, and I'm surprised I didn't read book 2 or 3, but I think it was just because of time issues. But I really, really liked Foundation, the first book in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. The trilogy is what I have here. The show is being adapted. The book is being adapted to a show on Apple TV in this month, September. It is September, and it's going to be like 23rd, 24th, I don't know, something later this month. And I wanted to get familiar with it. I still don't know whether or not the first story will be based on the first book, parts of the first book, or go beyond that, which is part of why I wanted to read more than the first book. But after reading it, I guess I feel more, after reading it and watching the trailer, I feel like the series is going to be not focusing beyond book 1, if even book 1. The way the story is structured is you have this mathematician, this pseudo something, like it's literally called a pseudo historian, I'm not sure. Basically, he's a mathematician who figured out how to calculate, based off previous evidence, previous history, the large-scale trajectory of society, of their kingdom, of their empire, in the far future. And he's predicting it's gonna fall. Things are gonna go to hell and things are gonna get destroyed. but there is some hope in the sense that this can last for millennia, or for multiple millennia, or it could last for 1 millennia, like 1,000 years versus like 30. If and only if we're willing to create this encyclopedia of knowledge and culture and science, all for the preservation of that. And with that information being valued and retained, we can survive beyond that. And the story itself doesn't focus what I'm trying to say. It focuses on conflict, but at the same time, it doesn't really focus on the large-scale conflicts. What we have here is we have the setup of the story, and then we flash forward to future aspects of the story where we see this encyclopedia, the foundation itself being the encyclopedia, basically trying to build information, and eventually at some point reaching the point where we're in the Dark Ages now, we have to defend it. And the story is structured in a way that we don't necessarily get to see the epic battles. What we see is the Foundation dealing with a certain threat, or recognizing a certain threat, and we're seeing how the creator of the Foundation, this initial scientist, mathematician, basically was able to use his science to predict what was going to happen and create a scenario that is suited to help protect the Foundation. And that's just the first one. And for a book that focuses almost entirely on dialogue, entirely on the in-between moments, it is just really good. Based off the trailer of the show, it's clearly trying to dig into the more epic aspects of it, which makes me think that it's going to be spanning it over more time. I think the creator of the show already talked about having a plan for like 7 seasons, like very detailed layout in his mind. That'll be interesting to see that perspective, but for the book, I actually really liked it. There was one problem in this book that I can't look past, which is the fact that this is just a major patriarchal setup. Like, we have every person in power, every person in charge or doing anything in the Foundation is a man, and there's like one woman in the story, and she's just some annoying wife. And I don't know at what point it occurred to me, I realized that this guy, Isaac Asimov, was a sexist asshole, which is a sad truth of people in his time, especially true for him. And luckily the show clearly has certain characters cast as women and women of color, and I appreciate it going in that direction, because it really wasn't at all relevant to the plot to have just all men in charge, and that was like the biggest flaw. But it was a solid book, and it was narrated by Scott Brick, one of my current favorite audiobook narrators of all time. So I look forward to continuing this. The only reason I haven't, I think, is just for allowing myself to appreciate and pace myself, because I could eat it all up now, but I'm not going to. Also because it's September, and these 3 months should be dedicated more to horror and thrillers, and that hasn't been working very well because I haven't been reading very much. But on that note, let's continue with was it the only thriller I read? That's sad. At least it was a good one. We have here C.J. Tudor's The Chalkman. I read her second book, Oh, Lord of Light, and The Other People, and I didn't love it. It was fine. This one I liked a lot more. So, like, this is a big homage to It, Stephen King's It, but it's what is it about? See, this, I don't know. I feel like, if you can imagine, It is basically what's going on here, but the story isn't a ripoff. Like, I feel like Stephen King rips off his own shit, and it annoys me. This one felt like a true homage. It's not something that's trying to just be It. It's trying to use these ideas, use these iconic imagery in It, and recreate it in a new lens, in a new way, and it worked really well. I was all for the It vibes here, and it was solid. It was solid. The C.J. Tudor is one of the few, if not the only, thriller writers who can genuinely get me to wonder, is this really supernatural? There are people I've already said about, like Riley Sager, they're incapable of making me believe that something is actually really supernatural, let alone like a serious threat to our main protagonist. Like this I really did believe it. She's able to make me believe the threat and believe that it is more than just some mundane story, and that's what I really want from a thriller book. Basically a book that can make me believe it might be horror. Solid book without getting really dense into the plot. Just because, like, really a lot of it just is just very similar to It, and I feel like if you liked It, or you like the structure of It rather, the overarching things, you might like this. And plus, there's not as much sexism, racism, xenophobia, just a lot to unpack about It. But a lot of the good here, without so much of the bad. Solid book. Very happy about that. I was supposed to read it with a friend, then I read it too fast. So, oops. Speaking of reading books with friends, I had The Healing Moon, which I read with Bree from the Lock Petition. And this one, I hate to say it, but right now it's probably my least favorite book, or least series book from N.K. Jemisin. This is book 1 of a duology, and it's about a world where essentially you have two societies that are facing one another, and each have their own sort of religious mindset. Most of our main characters are from a sort of a priesthood, which uses this mythological or godlike power of being able to get into people's dreams, and they use that to sort of guide people to death. They're basically like reapers, but they're not necessarily murderers, or at least they're not meant to be, not believed to be. And it's sort of this conflict between the two, and some individual who is basically abusing the priesthood, or rather is doing something that the priesthood is not supposed to do, in the process incriminating the priesthood, or at least members of the priesthood, and creating a larger conflict within the priesthood and the other society that they're jarring with. Is that a word? Is that the right word? I don't know. It doesn't matter. So overall, part of it I think was I haven't been in a great headspace to read generally, and obviously there are cases where like it shouldn't matter, but then there are books that like they're not bad, but they might take a bit more from me, and when I don't have the energy to give that, it hurts. I feel like it can hurt the book. So that's always a caveat I like to give here. But all in all, it was an okay book. I think I gave it 3 to 3.5 stars. Maybe it was 3.5 hard, like a hard 3.5. And I believe Brie gave this a similar one. I will try to remember to link to the video we made. We did a live show talking about this there. We talked about doing another one, maybe for horror, and I had an idea in my mind. I'm not sure if I actually messaged her about that. So those are the 4 books that I technically read in August, but I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to give you the 2 books that I finished in the first week or so of September, as I had a little bit of time to read and I wanted to finish these books. The first one's going to be African Europeans, and this was an arc that I got a while back, like at this time last year. I needed to read it. I finally did. Unfortunately, this was a book that was asking for a lot from the reader, and I worry that I wasn't in the headspace yet again to give it what it needed, the attention to detail. But more than that, like I don't think it's entirely my fault that I struggled to connect or follow this book. Personally, I didn't love the narration, which she narrated of her own book, which I admire a academic who puts in the effort to present their own work, but it's a skill that takes time to learn, and that is what it is. And so the audiobook itself wasn't great production value. The book itself, it's very compact, and while I do get the picture that she's trying to give an overarching narrative from basically, we're talking like the moment Africans began to have any sort of interaction with Europeans, all the way up to now, obviously. And there's so much information to pack into a book. Yet at the same time, it felt like we were getting snippets of narratives from it in a way that required me to follow along very absurd stories that made it very difficult for me to stay focused on the overarching narrative. And I would have liked, I guess, a bit more effort into tying it all into that overarching narrative. Again, this is just my opinion based off the reviews. I think other people have disagreed with me as far as how well it actually is able to cover all this stuff. What I will say is that it definitely does a good job, I think, of just covering a broad set of things that are going on. I just struggled with following along with it. And so big picture, I think it's a book worth reading, especially if it seems interesting to you. Just know it's not the easiest book, and it's a book that can not always be the, I guess, the easiest to read, I guess, mentally or just, academically, if that makes sense. But I'm glad I finally finished. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, maybe 3 to 3.5. And then a similar rating, actually I think it was this one I ended up giving 3.5 to 4 stars, which is The Night Tiger, and another book that I didn't struggle as much with, but still sort of my interest waned over time. I ended up putting it down while I was reading African Europeans, and I came back to it and I actually enjoyed the ending a lot more because of that. But this basically follows two characters, 2 Chinese characters, one of whom was the apprentice of some doctor or something, physician, who dies, and his finger's been separated from him, and it creates this dynamic where his body parts have to be recombined, or otherwise he will be stuck on Earth as a sort of malevolent spirit. And that's sort of where the night tiger aspect comes into it. And I think maybe I feel like that's more than I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but I feel like that is just the setting up the story. But on the flip side, we have this is the one character. We have the other character who I feel like is honestly felt more the main character, and she is this older girl, but still young, who is has a mother and a stepbrother and a stepfather, who the stepfather being very abusive, not very loving, but her connection with her stepbrother is better. And we basically follow her as she's trying to make it in a world that is very sexist, and it keeps pushing her to marry, to be the right kind of woman. And that aspect of it I really liked, how it explored that, how it handled that. Ultimately, we see the book explore her in a particular type of relationship, or potentially pursuing one at least. And I didn't love the setup. Like, there are parts of it that I ended up liking, but there are parts of it that I still sort of cringe at for certain reasons I think will be apparent in the book. It didn't work for me, even though I really wanted it to. It just didn't work completely. I think it worked partly. And again, without spoiling it, that's just the best I can say about that. Overall, it's a good book, and it's not at all what I was expecting. When I heard Night Tiger, I had this idea of like a circus in mind, and it's really much more just a character study of these two characters and how they get intertwined. And I think even more so of this one young girl, this young woman, and her trying to survive, and how that gets intersected with the story of this young boy. So not a bad book, but one that I just sort of wasn't always hooked on. So 3.5 to 4 stars. I guess that's everything. We have talked about all the books that I read, and thank you so much for making it this far if you have, and I hope you enjoyed these reviews that I've given you, and hopefully this isn't the last video you see of me for the next month. And as always, you stay safe, and I will see you next time, okay?